Hello, everyone. Today is May 16th, 2023. My guest today is Raj Samani. Raj is a computer security expert. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Raj.
My pleasure.
So, Raj, how did you enter the information security space?
Well, so I came into the industry really when there wasn't much of an industry. I think it was like the kind of mid to late 1990s, and I had an interest in security. But what I realized at the time was there wasn't really the type of jobs that we have today. At the time, I think my first job, I graduated with my master's, and I started on the help desk, which is I think where many of us kind of begin. And I started to assume the responsibilities managing the antivirus estate, or analyzing and developing acceptable use policies, because at the time we were having people using the internet inappropriately. And so I kind of was there as security began to be a component of managing an infrastructure. And then, of course, around me, this kind of industry kind of sprung up, and I was able to, I guess, move away from general IT and then start to focus on the areas that I was interested in, which was cybersecurity. Well, I mean, it wasn't cybersecurity then either.
What do you mean it wasn't cybersecurity then?
Well, we never called it cybersecurity, and I think we went through. Well, actually, I've done multiple roles: infosec, IT security, information governance, and now cybersecurity. But fundamentally, the intention remained the same. It was to preserve the confidentiality of data, to preserve its integrity, and make systems available and data available. So the principles remained the same, but the title fundamentally changed. And of course, the work was very different. Like, I think when I started, our concern was around like modem security. So I remember having to go around the office and switch off modems on desks because we were concerned about, overnight, for example, because we were concerned about people dialing in with PC Anywhere, for example. So the work has changed, but the principles haven't.
Okay. What would happen if someone dialed in with PC?
PC Anywhere, like fundamentally, the concern was some people can go in and gain access to the systems that they were connected to. So not too dissimilar to what we deal with now. And I remember reading about constructs like war dialing and yeah, the things that we don't really worry about today.
Okay. So the threat landscape has evolved.
Absolutely. Well, and but also like the 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 types of systems that we have to protect and how we protect them has changed fundamentally. When I started, I think at home I used to have I remember buying a 56 kbps modem and thinking like I'm the richest person on the planet, because now all of a sudden I can access the internet quicker and faster than anybody I've ever known. And it's funny, you look back on that now and you think, wow, okay, that's a big deal. Or likewise, I remember having 100 megabyte hard drive thinking, wow, okay, I've got all of the storage I could ever want. And so, yeah, technology has moved on. If you'd have told me, 30 years ago, hey, the the oven, for example, is going to have an IP address, I'd have called you crazy. But of course, now that's a very real thing. In fact, I can see the benefit of it as well. So that's probably one of the things that's changed so much.
So you mentioned an oven having an IP address, the
Mm.
smart home, smart technology. What do you think are the pros and cons of having our devices connected to the internet?
Well, I think it's a bigger question. The challenge we face today is our attack surface is bigger and wider than it's ever been. And invariably we'll talk about things like external attack surface management, for example. That's one of the hot topics today, i.e. the number of systems that you have accessible to the internet. But it's not just that, it's the footprint that we leave online as well. If you think about like doing a Google search of yourself, like, a while back, or likewise, doing a Google search of yourself today is very different things. And the fact that we're all so willing to post everything about ourselves online means that the attack surface is just really wide. And I think that's why we've seen the growth and rise of a kind of open source intelligence, is because actually you don't need, you can just be fairly gifted in terms of being able to search for things, because you can find out so much about people, executives, or even businesses online. So it is the broader question rather than ovens. For example, the challenge we face is that everything is now accessible and available to anybody.
Okay. So I guess what threats, what part of that attack surface has you most concerned?
Well, I mean, none of it and all of it at the same time. I mean, the good news is that we can do the same searches, we can do the same analysis, we can patch the same systems. We have such a wealth of technology available to us at our fingerprints, and in many cases provided through open source, for example, where we can learn and understand what the adversary sees. Likewise, we've got a wealth of intelligence that we are afforded that talks to us about the techniques being used by threat actors. So if we want to know, for example, what the most exploited vulnerability out is, or whether this particular vulnerability has remote code execution, or if we want to learn about these things, we have an industry that is open, that is transparent, and provides information about what threat actors are actively doing. Likewise, if we want to understand our own vulnerabilities, we have technologies that can do that. And so we have I say we have everything, but we have the tools that we need in order to protect ourselves. What we are faced with a challenge is having to do this at scale, whereby, yes, do we have systems that can alert us of suspicious behavior? Well, yes, of course we do. But what do you do when those alerts are in the thousands, in the hundreds of thousands, or even in the millions? And so that becomes the new paradigm shift in security, whereby it used to be about blocking the things that we knew to be bad. Now the challenge becomes, well, okay, there's a lot more nuance there. So threat actors are using enterprise tools to break into organizations. And so how do I know, in amongst the 3,000 connections that I have, which one of those is malicious? And so that's how I think security is fundamentally changed.
Okay. And so the complexity of the systems and are much higher than they used to be.
Complexity, the volume, the number, the accessibility of information, the capability of threat actors. I mean, so much has changed.
Okay. And throughout this change, what have you done in your approach of analyzing systems, analyzing potential threats that you believe have helped you in, maintaining that awareness of potential vulnerabilities?
I always tell people, if you want to work in a job or a career that is challenging, that demands your attention, that will intellectually stimulate you, that will allow you the opportunity to be able to do remarkable things, and this is the industry for you. And so throughout my career, I've been I've been very active in terms of writing, publishing, speaking, developing systems, developing platforms in my day job. So like I've just never stopped, I guess is the answer. The example would be, so in IoT, for example, I wrote a book on smart grids, or cloud computing, I wrote a book on cloud computing, and cryptocurrencies, I've written papers on crypto. So like you don't stop. And that for me is what's exciting about this industry, is that you have the opportunity to be able to really kind of learn, but also contribute, because this is a relative, well, not relatively, it is an incredibly immature industry. It's not been around for a considerable length of time. So we have the opportunity to be able to contribute towards our kind of greater understanding and our greater learning. And I think, like, for me, that's one of the positives or good things I love about this industry, is that we have a relatively but fairly very open, transparent culture, generally speaking. There are, of course, numerous scenarios in which things aren't public for obvious reasons, because we are dealing with criminals and who are trying to steal from us, and so there is an effort to hold a lot of operational security data back. But by and large, this is the industry that actually is adapting and evolving before our very eyes.
Yes, and you mentioned contributing, writing. So these are very novel topics. How, and you wrote your book, The Smart Grid, over 10 years ago, correct?
Right, yeah.
How do you approach that sort of writing? And say you have a topic that you're interested in, what do you do to prepare yourself for writing and then actually writing and completing that?
That's a good question. It's an odd one. I've often considered how I consume information. And what I found is, if I sit and read something, my memory recall is pretty poor. If I watch something, I'll forget about it the week later. I can barely remember, what I watched 3 hours ago, let alone like 3 months ago. And so one of the ways that I've approached, or I guess one of the ways that my brain has approached actually retaining information was, and I learned this like when I was going through school days, which was actually making notes and writing things out in my own way. And after I finished my master's, I went through, like 30 plus professional exams in various different operating systems and security platforms and firewalls and everything you can shake a stick at. But that allowed me the opportunity to be able to retain a lot of that information, retain a lot of the technical knowledge, and then translate that into my day-to-day working life. And so the first thing that I tend to do is I keep a book of everything that I study and learn. I did a whole piece around social engineering, so the psychology behind why people fall for phishing scams, and I've got notebooks and notepads physically written out, because I think I found that generally to be the most efficient approach. Likewise, when I start writing papers or articles, I'll do the same again. I'll go back to physical media in an effort to try to start to write things out. And I found that that's actually been the best approach for me. And I guess that's the thing, which is, if I look at sort of certainly my kids, their ability to retain information through alternative mechanisms and platforms is far higher than mine, like way higher than mine. Like my daughter, for example, she just sits there on her laptop and reads something and she can retain the information. Whereas with me, I kind of find, look, I need to print that out. I need to store that and create a color-coded charts and all sorts of things. But it's whatever works for you. And I think that's the thing, which is, when Eric Knapp and I wrote the Smart Grid book, or, when Brian, myself, and Jim wrote the book on cloud, it was a flight that I had to Japan. And I ended up pretty much writing like 3 chapters on that flight, but physically writing it out. I obviously didn't completely write them, but like the structure, the bones of it, everything that I needed was done. And so when I landed, it was like, okay, then I can just type it out. And so, yeah, I think that's taken a lot of time to learn that.
Writing things out with pen and paper, I think, is, even you as a chief, computer security expert still using pen and paper, it says something.
Well, I mean, it's what works. Like right now I'm talking to you and I've got, my little green book about my my musical theory, for example. So, yeah, I find that that's the approach that works for me. And I think like that's the irony, right? We live in a world in which we are asked to categorize our strengths and weaknesses, and we labor upon these weaknesses. But like, what we need to recognize is what our strengths are as people and how we consume and understand data and information. And we should double down on those strengths, because that's the way my mind works. It's just the way it is. And even, because I don't read fiction books, I find them a waste of time. But like every single book that I read, if I want to retain or remember information, I'll make a note of it. And I've got books here that I've read on body language, for example. So understanding how to read if somebody's not lying, because you can't do that, but how to read body language to determine if somebody's feeling uncomfortable. And I wrote that down like 15 years ago, and I can still tell you how to do that, because I retain that information because I wrote it down. And I've got the books here as well, my notes about that.
Okay. Pivoting quickly, you mentioned that you've written some work on cryptocurrencies. Another software technology that's been emerging is, neural networks, learn language models. Also, another technology that I've heard could disrupt the encryption space is quantum computing. What emerging technology has your interest, or do all of them? And, how do you see, or what are you thinking with these technologies emerging now?
So I love technology. I really do. And, all of these technologies have real practical application, I think, to really change and revolutionize the way we live. Likewise, like with any technology, even they have the potential to cause harm. And I remember having this conversation with somebody years back, and they were talking about cryptocurrency as being a potential force for bad. And I said, well, but they said that about the internet when we were getting the internet, within work environments. People were complaining about employees being unproductive because they were just surfing the web all day. And before that, they talked about mobile phones, or phones, whereby people were concerned about people making personal telephone calls on business equipment. And so all of these technologies have the opportunity to cause real opportunity. Yes, machine learning is a core component of what we do, because we have to drive stronger efficacy within the intelligence of our products. Likewise, quantum computing is an area of interest, but also concern. Like, we're actively analyzing what the impact of quantum-enabled adversaries look like, or the use of deepfakes, for example. We've already seen attacks using deepfakes. So, and again, with cryptocurrency, we see cryptocurrency as the default payment method for ransomware. So all of these technologies have potential for good, but likewise, they've got a potential for maliciousness. And, things like augmented reality, for example, is an area of extreme interest right now, which is how do we translate and communicate complex technical issues in a way that doesn't involve using Microsoft PowerPoint. So these are all technologies we're actively, constantly analyzing, looking at. We're coordinating with some of the biggest minds. Like we just launched a partnership with the University of South Florida, for example, in Tampa. And so now we're working with academia and professors across the globe around, well, okay, what is the impact of a quantum enabled adversary? And actually, what are the concerns that we need to be thinking about? And so, yeah, like all technologies, like the internet, like the phone, you're not going to stop it. You're not going to, just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So what you have to do is understand it, get together with the best minds you can, and determine ways to anticipate and proactively protect against the misuse of those particular technologies.
That makes sense. And actually, yesterday I was in a cafe and the person next to me was saying, I think they were talking about just playing sports, but they were saying the best way to be on the defensive is to be on the offensive. And I think for cybersecurity, that, information security, this industry, that is true.
Well, and I think that's the point, which is we've seen innovation from threat actors at a frightening pace. And if we think that threat actors aren't going to adopt new technologies, then we're fooling ourselves. So whether you like it or not, at some point, like I remember there was a steganography tool that came out, and within 48 hours, we saw uses of that stego tool by nation states. And so this is the game of cat and mouse that we've either consciously or subconsciously kind of accepted to be part of. And so you've got to stay ahead. You've got to stay one step ahead, at least half a step ahead, but you have to try and stay ahead of them. And that is, I think that's the intellectually stimulating part of this industry, which is if you think you know it all, there will be a tweet that will come out that will make you realize that actually you clearly don't. So just keep an open mind and always keep learning.
Yes, always keep learning is very important. You mentioned, the emergence of a tool, and then within 48 hours, a nation state utilized that tool for their own interests. Within the last year and a half, we've had Russian-Ukraine war. You wrote a book on the smart grid, and I'm not sure, but of others, but I know in 2015 there was a grid attack on around Christmas 2015 against Ukraine from Russia. And so I guess in the last year and a half, what have you observed in the cyber domain for, in the Russia-Ukraine war?
So there's obviously been the use of wiper attacks, and I think that's a particular concern for many organizations, in particular because
what's a wiper attack?
So it's malware that would be supplanted inside an environment with the intention of wiping systems, and its sole purpose is destruction. And so that's, I think, well, certainly early on, that's partly been the modus operandi. Mm-hmm. But again, when we start to think about cybersecurity, there's this misconception that we're talking about computers and malware, but actually the cyber domain is broader than that. And there's been a great deal of activity to influence and spread information that's clearly not true. And that exists, obviously, not just because of this conflict, but actually broader than that. And so, look, there's been a lot that's happening around the globe, which is not just constrained to one specific geographic region. And I think that's the thing that we have to acknowledge is that digital is the realm of digital is not restricted to physical boundaries. And so an attack today in Eastern Europe can quite as easily turn up in Western Europe in a millisecond. Likewise, it can be halfway around the world almost as quickly. So we have to acknowledge that the best way that we can protect our environments and protect our society is to be enabled with the best intelligence we possibly can. And that's a perpetual issue that we have to accept, because clearly and evidently these attacks will continue to happen because it's less costly, and we have the opportunity of non-repudiation. So the source of the attack can deny any involvement at all. So yes, I think we absolutely should be concerned about the tactics being used within specific conflicts, but we mustn't limit our thinking just to a specific area or a specific geographic region. These attacks have and could and often do spill over into other domains, into other geographies.
That makes sense. And you mentioned a wiper attack in contrast to a ransomware. Ransomware encrypts and holds that encryption for ransom, and once that's paid, supposedly the threat actor might decrypt that for the victim. But wipers, they're just corrupting or deleting the data.
Yeah, so the intention of a wiper attack is destruction. The intention of a ransomware attack is and should generally is usually, not always, is profit. Now, there have been some ransomware campaigns which have been destruction wrapped up in the profit envelope, which obviously clearly wasn't profit, but by and large, that's the intent.
Okay. And Raj, one last question before we wrap up, and kind of related to this is, why, the economics of cybersecurity, why, what is the point? Why do we spend money caring about this at all?
Because it's an attack on our way of life. I mean, hospitals getting held hostage, organizations paying fraudsters, paying fraudsters for substandard or non-existent PPE. I mean, this is not a horrible science fiction novel. This is every day, with potential attacks by spreading misinformation during election cycles. I mean, this is what's happening. And so people don't rob banks with guns. They do it with USB sticks now. So they're spending money. We absolutely do need to as well.
My guest today has been Raj Samani. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Raj.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.